What's going on, guys? It is Murderink here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today I have an awesome video for you guys. Today we're going to be going over the Angels and Demon composition for Ultra Nightmare. This is a 1-key, it's using insane champions, and I know there's not a lot of content out right now. There's a lot of people complaining about it. If you've watched my channel before and you know what I like to do, I like to make clan boss teams using pretty much unconventional champions and really watching them shine, coming up with new ideas, and you can make some of the best teams very quickly when you collaborate with other people. And I want to give a huge shout out to Deadwood Jedi. We spent like 3 or 4 hours, 2 nights in a row in Discord call. It was a ton of fun, really casual thing. We were just talking about certain clan boss teams, and we came up with this monster team right here, and it was just a ton of fun. I look forward to doing this again and bring you guys even more clan boss team and clan boss content using champions you would never expect. The first thing I want to do is I want to give you a rundown of this roster. We are using 1 Maneater in a 2-to-1 speed cycle, which is absolutely insane. Every other team's using 2 Maneaters. They're using 2 Maneaters and a Pain Keeper. So we said, what can we do differently? Every team's using a Dracomorph to really push that 1-key damage. Another thing, what can we do differently? Some people want to use Dracomorph in dungeons and not sacrifice the gear. So this composition specifically is using Maneater, Skullcrusher, Eleanor as the leader, Prince Kymar, who, if I'm not mistaken, I've never seen in Clan Boss in a successful Ultra Nightmare team, as well as Mashald. Obviously, the name Angels and Demons came from Bellinor being the angel and Prince Kymar and Mashald being the demons in the factor. I want to give a huge shout out to Infinite, one of my clanmates who came up with the name. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, so huge shout out to you, man. So now the first thing I want to do is, now that we've talked about who we have, let's talk about the interactions between these champions. So as everyone knows, Kymar's really unique in the fact that he reduces every single cooldown all the way to 0, making all of the abilities come up. This is the sole reason as to why a single Maneater will work for this team composition. He will use his unkillable buff for the first AoE, Kymar will reset it and he will have it up for the second AoE. And as far as the stun goes, we have Skullcrusher using his unkillable and counterattack, guiding the threat to him for this specific video and take. This is green affinity, so Skullcrusher is weak affinity, so obviously we're losing damage there, but this stun is always going onto him as it would on void affinity as well. So that's really cool. Also, we have really awesome interaction with Bellinor. If you don't know how Bellinor works, he has a crit rate aura, and his A1 also gives 30% crit rate. So with the 24% crit rate aura and a 30% crit rate buff on his A1, that is 54% crit rate going on all of your champions. So just think about that for a second. Think about how little crit rate, how much crit damage you can actually give the remaining champions on your team to really maximize the potential of the raw damage these champions can have. On top of that, we have Mashald with this extra turn, filling that role, making this a 2-to-1 ratio team, giving everyone a speed buff, but also giving everybody increased crit damage, further improving the raw damage output of these champions. Now obviously, as we can see here, if you didn't know before, Bellinor also has a defense down and weakened, but he also hits the target after applying that, giving him some additional use outside of Dracomorph. Now the only poisoner we do have on this team is Kymar. He's not the best. It's a 1-turn duration. He only applies 1 at a time, so this is basically a non-poison raw damage team. Obviously, to reach the very high threshold of a single key, I had to put Skullcrusher in a poison set, also known as a toxic set, and I am using accuracy on the Kymar. There is a bit of a desync with that logic, because if you don't know this, Mashald does steal the attack up buff that any affinity boss will put up, and he applies it to himself, making his damage absolutely skyrocket. The problem that I'm about to go over is Kymar actually strips buffs with this A2, so he can be making it so Mashald loses out on that extra damage. So now that we've gone over all of these things, let me pause this clip and go right back to the beginning The only downside, and this composition, while you can replicate it, I'm going to go over the gear once we run over the video. The setup is a bit annoying since we have a champion like Kymar who resets every single cooldown. So you do have to manual up until just before turn 7 is when you have to manual up to. So in case you're looking to replicate this in any scenario, let's get right into it and what you have to do. So to start off the match, you're going to use an A1 from Mashald, followed by an A1 from Maneater. You're going to use the counter attack from Skull Crusher, defense down and weaken there. Then the clan boss is going to go. Now after that, the only thing you have to focus on here is you're going to use the A2 and A3 combination of Mashald on cooldown. You are only going to use the A1 from Kymar. You are only going to use the unkillable, as we can see here, in turn 1, always before that negative affinity is dropped on your team to make sure that no one gets that decreased speed. And you're not going to use Skull Crusher's counterattack until the stun round, which is going to be now. He is going to go twice here, and that's pretty much all you have to look at while going forward. Now there are going to be rounds up until turn 6 where your team is not protected fully by the boss. It's not a huge deal. The clan boss does not do a ton of damage to you in these early rounds, so unless you're building like 9,000 total health, which is barely possible, you're going to be fine going forward. So as we said before, this is a rather simple setup. All you have to remember is use the unkillable from Maneater just before that second AoE, so you're not getting the decreased speed. Make sure you're using Skull Crusher's counterattack before every stun round. And now we are moving closer to that turn 6 where we can start setting this up on full auto. And I have to say, this comp is a ton of fun to watch. As we can see, we're getting just before that AoE 2 where we did use the unkillable for the second time. Blocking that decreased speed. We're still using that extra turn from Mashald. He did steal that attack up using the A1 again. And now you can kind of see why you can't just hit auto here, because then Kymar will instantly use that reset button. It will desync everything, so that's not what we're looking for here. So the second stun just went on to Skull Crusher here. Now we're using the A1 here. Defense down and weaken, which is easy. Skull Crusher gets that A1 off. He is doing weak hits, so his damage is suffering a bit. And as mentioned before, A2, A3 on cooldown. And after you use the A1 here, you can just go ahead and hit auto and watch this awesome team in action. So at the start of turn 7, what's going to happen is Kymar is going to reduce everyone's cooldowns, resetting everything, counterattack here, extra turn, speed up. We do have the unkillable buff going off right here. And so we are going to be protected for this second AoE here. And by the time Maneater has his cooldown back up, it's going to be ready for that first AoE. Since this is a 2-to-1 ratio starting in turn 7. So now we have the counterattack buff going up, guiding all of the threat to Skull Crusher. We have the counterattacks from the masteries here. And this is pretty much what a rotation looks like. This is an awesome team. I'm really glad I got to talk with Deadwood Jedi. We got to really put our minds together, figure out this team. I think this is going to open up so many new teams in the future. So I'm really excited to work on this. And there we go. We just saw it right there. All of the cooldowns were then again decreased after that first AoE. And this whole cycle just continues until the end of the run. So that's really cool. That's the setup. It may sound complicated at first, but once you get the general idea of it, it's really, really simple. You're just following very certain rules on which champions use what turn. There's no use A1, turn 1. There's nothing like that. You just have to know when to use unkillable, when to use the counterattack. After that single turn delay from Mashald using the A2 and A3, it's extremely simple, and obviously never reducing everyone's cooldown until that turn 7, and then just watch the team go. And it's a pretty flawless team as it is, and it's a ton of fun to watch, really, with all the cooldowns being reset. As mentioned before, Skull Crusher is a weak affinity champion here, which is good for this stun. It's not the best for damage, so now what we're going to do is we're going to fast forward to the recap, go over the total damage, and see what these 5 champions, these, I guess, misfit champions that you really wouldn't expect to be in a one key team. Let's see what their total damage is. Now, one thing I want you to do, I'm going to pause this really quickly. Think in your head who the top damage dealer of this team is going to be. I'm really curious to see what you guys say, so leave a comment below or just think about it. Now, once I show you the damage breakdown, I want to get your reaction in the comments as to what you thought and what is actually going to be shown on the screen here. Alright guys, so as we can see here, we have Bellinor at 18.9 million damage, Mashald, the Kingpin leader, at 20.9 million damage, Maneater without a toxic set at 9.3 million damage, which is pretty impressive considering that's all from raw damage. We have Skullcrusher in a toxic set doing 7.1 million. This is kind of on the lower threshold of the other keys I did attempt, and obviously, if he isn't weak hitting and he's just putting in raw damage, his damage will be much higher. And we also have Kymar, the only actual poisoner or champion that has a poison on his kit, doing 14.8 million damage, giving this team a total of 71.12 million damage on a green affinity boss. So this team is absolutely awesome. And what do you guys think? Were you guys expecting Mashald to be the king here? Were you expecting Bellinor, Kymar being the poisoner? Maybe that shocks some people where he is actually in third place for the highest damage dealer. So curious to get your feedback on what you thought could be the possibility for these champions. Now that we went over that, as always, let's go over the gear of these champions. Let's go over the speeds of these champions. One thing I want to talk about the speeds. If you do try to replicate this, please do not change the speeds unless I say you can. Some of this is so sensitive where +1 or -1 speed from what I am currently running will literally desync this entire team and it just won't work. You're going to wipe. So this was probably one of the most frustrating teams to actually figure out speed-wise while min-maxing all of these champions to make sure it is a 1 key. Obviously, if you've seen from previous videos when I do 80 million or 90 million damage with the team composition, it's very easy to translate that to a 1 key for most people. This key, since with as much gear as I have on all of these champions, the fact that I only got 71 on an affinity means this is most likely going to be a 2 key for everyone else trying to replicate this team composition. So really quickly going over Bellinor, we have speed on him, we have crit damage, we have attack percent. As mentioned before, one really interesting thing to note about Bellinor is he will not use defense down and weaken if you have too much crit rate. So unfortunately, due to how his AI works, and this is definitely a bug, and I'm going to talk to Clarium about this, if you give him too much crit rate, he will not use his defense down and weaken. It's just part of his AI. The AI always wants to use the A1 if the crit rate is too high, which is definitely a problem when you're trying to min-max damage. Anytime he doesn't crit, you obviously lose a ton of damage. So his stats are 5400 attack, 204 speed. This speed can go all the way down to 202 and it can go all the way up to 209 if I remember correctly. 52% crit rate, 275 crit damage, and 258 accuracy to make sure that defense down and weaken are always landing. Now I'm going to show you the masteries for these champions. We have War Master, we have the defense tree, we have the retribution talent, as well as the talent that will counterattack deterrence on a stun, which is very important for this team composition, where other compositions that are in a 2-to-1 ratio not using Mashald can't really capitalize on, specifically being the Seeker teams. It's very hard to get the raw damage to heal yourself up every single time and ensuring you have that counterattack. With Mashald, it's much easier because he applies Leech to the boss, making these champions literally full heal every single time, giving them that constant chance to always counterattack on every single AoE. The next champion we're going to talk about is Kymar, and before I move on, I do want to tell you that every single champion I used here today is fully booked. So really quickly going over his gear, obviously this is +12, maybe we'll take that to +16 at a later date. So these are the stats and gear I have on Prince Kymar. He has 186 speed. Now some people may have been expecting some crazy speeds. That's not what I'm looking for, and that's been my biggest issue with the teams with Seeker. Seeker, as opposed to Mashald, requires much higher speeds for a 2-to-1 ratio than all of the other teams, so I really like using Mashald instead of Seeker. That's always been my preference from the start. So getting back to Kymar, he does have very low base attack, so 3800 attack is what I have on him today, 186 speed as mentioned before. 71% crit rate. As we know, Bellinor does give that crit aura as well as that 30% from the A1, 262 crit damage and 248 accuracy to make sure his poisons are landing. And as previously mentioned, all of the masteries on all of the champions are in fact the same. Moving on to Mashald, who is the fastest champion on this team. Very quickly going over the gear and the stats he has on him. This is a champion that also needs accuracy. However, since we are getting that crit aura from Bellinor, it actually makes it significantly easier to build these champions with high speed, like 253 speed, but also giving them damage because I don't really have to focus on getting 100% crit rate, which is definitely a huge relief and a lot of value added to Bellinor that most people probably don't realize. So we have 4300 attack on this guy, 286 accuracy, which is a little bit high, and 260 crit damage. Moving on to our single Maneater champion, quickly going over the gear that he is wearing. He is someone else who is pretty decently min-maxed, I must say. Out of all of the champions, I think he is the best built of them all, and I'm going to go over that in a second. He is the second fastest champion on this team. None of the rest are really close to these speeds, so these are really the only speeds you have to look at going forward. We have 3000 attack, which is slightly low, but on top of 251 speed, 74% crit rate, 233 crit damage, giving him insane raw damage and 104 accuracy. Now, the final champion in this team composition is in fact Skullcrusher with a toxic set, as mentioned before. And unfortunately, my toxic gear isn't that great. Ideally, I could put the fast Maneater in a toxic set, but I went on a selling rampage of my gear and sold pretty much all of my 20 speed roll toxic gear, and I said I'd never use it. Murder Inc., you played yourself. So not well done there, but I am going to farm Dragon for some more just in case down the line another one of these awesome team comps with really unique champions do pop up. So here's the banner, the necklace and ring. Going over his total stats very quickly, we have 3400 defense, which is on the lower side, 228 speed. There is some playroom. You can go from 228 to 227 to 225 speed. Outside of that, even though I skipped over them, do not change Mashald's speed. He always has to be the fastest, and do not change the Maneater speed. Going up or down in any direction will desync the entire team. So please, if you want to replicate this, stick to those speeds. We have 63% crit rate, 222% crit damage, and unfortunately 179 accuracy. Accuracy isn't a huge deal with Skullcrusher in this composition because I'm using Mashald, who's already placing that heal reduction as well as leech debuff on the clan boss. So now after seeing this, the question is, what is next? Hopefully you were as excited in seeing this video as I was. I really enjoy making really cool clan boss teams, as anyone who's been watching me knows. So what I'm going to do next is, in the next video, I'm going to show you different variations you can run with this team setup that's more, I guess, player friendly and will do a lot more damage using champions like a Dracomorph instead of Bellinor. Obviously Dracomorph is going to do 5 or 10 million more damage per key, which is absolutely huge. The main focus is a lot of people don't want to use Dracomorph because it really messes up their dungeon teams when you have to use such a crucial and vital champion as Dracomorph. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different variations of this team composition. And as of right now, if everything stays the same and nothing new is discovered, this is the only one that is going to have Kymar and Skullcrusher in it. The others will not have Kymar and Skullcrusher. So as always, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about this awesome team comp below. Did it surprise you to see someone like a Kymar in the clan boss setting? Isn't it crazy how you can use one unkillable champion, being that Maneater, to protect you on a 5-turn cooldown for both of the AoEs, on top of using Skullcrusher to soak that stun with that priority threat focusing by giving him the unkillable buff and the counterattack buff on the rest of your champions. Don't forget, if you like this content, subscribe, turn on that notification bell so you don't miss this next video I'm talking about, and I will see you all in the next upload.